Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about all the books I read in December, and I'm going to let you know which ones are worth it and which ones you can leave on the shelf. Let's come in strong with Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These. This book has had such a resurgence since its original kind of splash that it made when it was shortlisted for the Booker, and I've been so excited to see it. For some reason, it just didn't make its way far enough up my to-be-read list originally, and so now I'm finally glad that I was able to tackle it. I loved it. I thought that Claire Keegan was able to pack an incredible punch into such like a concise, small amount of like space in this like very short novel. I loved it. I thought it was intriguing. It made me think a lot about life and like what is good and what makes us good and what actions are good and how those things can sometimes be perceived as like standalone events, but when you take the goodness and you place it in context of other actions, like what does that do to those actions and how does that contextualization kind of like color the goodness? And I'm speaking specifically to the end. So, spoiler alert, get ready. But at the end, the protagonist is walking back to his home with this woman that he's like ostensibly like saved from a bad situation at this nunnery, and they talk regularly about like the fact that she's barefoot, and there are people in the town who are commenting on the fact that she doesn't have shoes and it's so cold and it's snowing. And then you get to the house and you realize that he's been carrying shoes for his daughter in his other hand. It's something I could think about and talk about like all day long. I think it is fascinating, and this idea of this like savior complex, and he's gonna do all these amazing things, and yet he's also holding in his hand something that could like really change this situation immediately, but therefore his daughter who's waiting at home. And listen, you can make an argument that like maybe the shoes weren't the same size and maybe they would have fit her, and but like I do think that that tension is super interesting to explore and to think about. And then to think about too, it's like even within our goodness, who are we putting first? Is that right? Is that wrong? Like, and it's not, I don't have a judgment against it, but I do think that it calls into question kind of this like the purity of the goodness, right? That if we take that outside of the contextualization of the fact that like he's holding shoes and this girl has been left like in a shed, I think for days, and she's walking barefoot in the snow. Oh, it's just fascinating to me. It's just fascinating. And I think she just did such a beautiful job of building this really complex plot and this really complex world. And the journey that the protagonist goes through. I just think she did a really great job. Keeping in the Claire Keegan theme, on another app, someone had suggested her book Foster because they said they enjoy it more than Small Things Like These. So I read Foster. Listen, I enjoyed Foster. I think it was successful. I don't think she packed as much complexities into this work as she did Small Things Like These, but I enjoyed it. Um, I don't I didn't enjoy it more than Small Things Like These. So with that, I'm kind of confused about their POV there. I would be intrigued to see if you all have read both of them and if you all like Foster over the other one. My understanding is both of them have been made into movies, and I'm excited to check them out. Foster is about a young girl who goes to live with relatives while her mother is in the process of giving birth to a younger sibling. And through that, you realize that the family she's staying with, her relatives, they have lost a child. And again, I think that there could have been more complexities there. Like we could have delved into something a little bit deeper there. I think she handled it well, but I wanted a little bit more, like in Small Things Like These. And in the end, the relatives would take the young child back to her birth parents, and the ending is fascinating. And I think in that moment when the girl realizes that she's going to be staying with her birth parents, she realizes what she got from these relatives, and I think it's this like love that she has been yearning for and needing as a child. And she calls this relative daddy for the first time. And it's just fascinating the way Claire Keegan does it because her birth father then comes like, I think angrily at them. And then she uses the phrase like, I warned him. And it's like, who is she warning? And like in the calling out of daddy, like she's calling this man daddy, but also she calling out to her father and calling him daddy. And then who's warning and what happens? And like that's where it ends. And it's just like, again, it's a Claire Keegan ending that I want to talk about with someone like over and over again. But yeah, I think that they're absolutely worth it. Loved both of those titles. My other favorite reads for December was Shred Sisters by Betsy Lerner. She is such a dear. If you all do not follow her on TikTok, you should go over there and follow her. You should follow me as well. But you should go follow her on TikTok. She reads her old journals and she's just so open and honest. And I think she creates this really cool dynamic of like intergenerational interactions on TikTok that make that experience really special. At its core, Shred Sisters is really about mania and how mania impacts everyone. I think she does it really successfully. I found certain characters in that book very triggering. I felt that and triggering in that they were written so well that they felt very true to life and very reminiscent of people that I've experienced. Yeah. Oh, and it was fascinating. There's the one of the sisters processing and navigating mania. And then there's Amy. And Amy is really who we're following for the majority of the book. And it's fascinating to me. Amy starts making choices towards the latter half of the book that gave me pause. And I remembered stopping and I said, this doesn't ring true. And I was like, how do I want to talk about this? And then I kept reading and I realized I had become the mother in the book, which is a whole thing to dissect in and of itself. But the mother was like a very, like, I would argue, judgmental and had a lot of expectations for Amy that she put onto Amy. And especially because Amy's sister was navigating this mania, a lot of grace was given to her. And so I actually don't think that Amy's choices were out of character. I think what happened is that we were projecting our expectations of how Amy should behave onto her, and me, the royal we, onto her as a character. But I actually think that they ring very true in the way that they were written, and my reaction to them was because of my expectations that I had put on Amy and the role I needed Amy to play in this very complex dynamic, which was really fascinating for me and like adds a whole other layer, I think, to this story. And I loved it. So again, I think Shred Sisters is absolutely worth it. Next, y'all, I did it. I needed some brain candy and I read Cher's Memoir Part 1. Yeah, Cher, the Memoir Part 1. I think Part 2 comes out later this year. I loved it. It was so much fun. It was so Cher. I will say there is an inordinate amount of detail. Buckle in and get ready for that if you take on this journey. We're only getting to, I think, the very early 80s in like 400 pages. So just know that going in, we start way back in the family tree, and we are only getting to the 80s in part 1. But listen, I enjoyed myself. Cher within the book acknowledges that she didn't really write it. And she makes a quip about like her Twitter account. Like if you follow her on Twitter, like you know that she didn't write this. That said, I do feel like her voice is imbued like throughout it. She has like little quips against or at Sunny throughout the whole book, which justifiably so. And I knew a lot of that, but like not to this extent and to this degree. And so to that end, I think that piece of it, while she was really navigating the complexities of that relationship, I think that that's handled really interestingly and like is really insightful and kind of like opens up a side of it that I didn't fully understand in this way until I read the book. But yeah, listen, Brain Candy, it's fun. There's like so much detail. You won't need any more details about this period of her life. But yeah, I really did enjoy myself and I think it's absolutely worth a read. Now we get to the books that I did not love. For one of my book clubs, we read The Plot. We're getting ready to read the sequel, which is the sequel to this, and I'm nervous. I feel like they gave away the plot. of the plot really early on. And sometimes with books, I don't mind if you can see what's coming as long as the journey is the point and the reveal isn't the purpose of the book. But I would argue in this genre, the reveal is kind of why you're reading it. And everything should be leading to that. And I felt like it was like telegraphed a mile away. I feel like it was really obvious, which is such a bummer. Um, yeah, it was just fine. Oof. I'm intrigued to see if the sequel changes anything for me. Um, Maybe I'll think of them differently as like a piece, like together. But I don't get it. I think it was. It's about a story that the main protagonist takes and turns into a novel, and it is this like huge success. And at some point in the story, you find out that this is a true story. Some people who are very upset that it got out and are trying to like keep their role in it anonymous because, like, bad stuff went down. So when they start integrating sections of the novel that the protagonist wrote into the book, that's when it got interesting. And I will say in that way, the author built interesting tension. Like I got excited and I wanted to know more, but the reveal of kind of like who the person was who was trying to keep this secret, I think was really obvious. And it bummed me out. And I wish we could have built that like cool tension and then also had the reveal be cool or more interesting. Because I do think that the mechanics that they employed leading up to it were good. It just needed to be better, I think, in the reveal aspect of it for it to really land successfully. So yeah, so tentatively, it's a skip unless the sequel's really good, but that also feels like such a commitment to have to read two books to feel like the first one was a success. Does that make sense? So yeah, if you need to. This last one, Good Material by Dolly Alderton. Y'all, I was excited. The Times named this book one of the top 5 fiction books of 2024. Now listen, I've been trepidatious of that list. I think we should all be trepidatious of those lists in general because I think a lot of it's who you know and the money and the marketing dollars and the 2023 list, I fully agreed, I think with like 3 of them, but one of them I was confused about, and then the fifth one I was adamantly against. Not just in like, I couldn't even see why it was on the list. It was like one of my least favorite reads of 2023. That's another video. Spoiler alert, The Fraud. So for this year, when the list came out, I think I had read 3 of the 5. All Fours by Miranda July, which I can get down with that. James by Percival Everett, I can get down with that. Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, which I can get down with that. And You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique, and Good Material by Dolly Alderton. So I was on board with the first 3. I was excited. I was intrigued. I said, let me read these other 2. It took me a long time to get a hold of a copy of You Dreamed of Empires. I don't think the publishing house expected it to have this like end of year buzz. So, but I did finally get a copy at like an airport bookstore of all places. So I'm excited to dive into that. And then I read Good Material, and listen, I call this into question in its merit in general, but then particularly to be in the top 5. Y'all, it's about a breakup, and we follow the male protagonist through the first like 250 pages. He's brilliantly written, but the problem is he's a brilliantly written, insufferable cis straight white male. And like, there's nothing intriguing, there's nothing endearing. He seems kind of like just a complainer. He seems really stagnant in his development. It just seems like, oh, bro, this was your fault. But it's also very clear 10 pages in. And I would argue she wrote him brilliantly. Like she really got that across about like who he is. But the problem is that you don't want to read that for 250 pages. And like I think roughly 250 pages in, the perspective shifts and we get the perspective of the girlfriend. But what's fascinating is that I felt like she wrote the girlfriend really stagnant or really cardboard. It was really two-dimensional. And then it made me wonder, is this a breakup that the author has gone through? And it almost felt like the female character was kind of giving substantiation for the reasons why things went down the way that they did. And it felt very factual and very, and that wasn't as intriguing to read. And then you find out that, like, which I don't think I'm giving anything away because it's to me it's very obvious from early on. He's this comedian who's struggling, and there's this big Edinburgh festival that he's been to several years, and like no one wants to come to his show. And immediately my thought, and I think this is the same festival, this is where Baby Reindeer and Fleabag came out of. So to me, it was very clear that it was like, oh, well, he's going to take this breakup and turn it into a show. I think his friends even suggested that at one point. So it's like, oh, well, yeah, like this is where this is going. And I would have loved to have read about that. I would love to have read about like him workshopping this and learning things about himself and growing and, healing from this relationship through that process. But no, we just get the dumpy version. And then she comes in and gives her perspective. And then we jump to the show's complete and he delivers it and everybody loves it. And the woman like kind of comes to peace with that and like their relationship and he's healed. But isn't that what we want to read about? I don't That's what I want to read about. I don't know if maybe I didn't get it. That's possible. So please let me know if there's something you saw in good material that I didn't get. But it was just a miss for me for those reasons. And listen, did I judge it harder because it was on the New York Times list of like top 10 books of the year, but like top 5 fiction books of the year? Yeah, I absolutely did. And maybe that wasn't fair, but like maybe it wasn't fair to put it on the list. I'm so sorry. I just think there were so many other good ones. I think there were so many other good ones that we could have chosen. So I'm a little nervous for You Dreamed of Empires, but I'm excited to dive in. Hopefully, I wonder if it'll be the same as 2023, where I agreed with three of them. One of them was and then the fifth one I disagreed with. I didn't dislike this one as much as I disliked The Fraud, but wasn't my fave. Those are my reads from December. One more time, I think you should pick up small things like these. Pick up Foster. I think it's worth a read. Absolutely pick up Shred Sisters. Check out Cher for just a little brain candy. The plot, I mean, I think you can miss it, and I would leave good material on the shelf. I think that there are other ways that you can spend your time. Let me know what you all read in December, and I can't wait to talk to you next week.